Welcome to Creekside Chats with Successful Real Estate Investors, brought to you by Steed Talker Capital, promoting prosperity and harmony to help you flourish in all areas of life. Join in as we explore the motivations and goals of real estate investors and how their ability to invest abundantly has provided them with the time and freedom to contribute to the world in a creative and thoughtful way. Now please welcome your host, Dr. Allen.
Dr. Allen here, Enlightened Investors. Thrilled to be with you again today as we visit with our guest, Yakov Smart, who is no stranger to the world of LinkedIn as the author of Disrupting LinkedIn. As a leading authority on raising private capital by tapping into a new way of using LinkedIn, Yakov has much wisdom and insight into using LinkedIn for building wealth. Welcome, Yakov. Yakov, bring to mind and share with us a memorable experience from your childhood that as you look back on it now, you go, yeah, that did influence who I am today.
Where shall we start? When we talk about childhood, it's not necessarily even a childhood. It's late childhood, early teens, if that's okay. Does that?
A childhood could be anywhere from 1 to 50, and you're not even there yet.
No, I'm not. So I remember I was in a car and I was in the passenger seat and my great uncle was driving and we didn't know each other too well, but he asked me a question that was a pretty typical question that you get asked. That you ask a 13-year-old. It's, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah.
And his frame of reference was that he had grown up in a communist country, quite literally, in the former USSR. And he didn't really have an understanding of what entrepreneurship or business was and wasn't. It was a very different view, and it was a very different time that he grew up in. And he asked me, and I mentioned the first thing that came to mind was, I want to write. I like writing. That was the first thing that sort of popped into mind for me. And he laughed and he said that in Russian, the saying, he said, "Это не хлеб," which means it isn't bread. So basically, he was telling me that you can't make a living writing. So what do you really want to be? And I said, I know I want to be a businessman as well as a writer. I think those two things go all together. And he just, again, sort of laughed and said, don't we all want to be businessmen? And it was just, the reason I share that experience, because today I think one of my unique gifts and skill sets is in writing, and it happens to be writing copy or in writing things online that get people to see things differently, get a different sense of awareness, and most importantly, to take action. And so it is very much a viable business in writing and being creative and self-expression and putting together different products, programs. My point being is how important perspective is, because to that person, he was speaking truth, what was true to him, right? To him, he didn't understand how writing could lead to generating significant income. And it just goes to show that perspective oftentimes is everything. And it also goes to show that the world is rapidly changing. 10 years ago, being a social media expert or social media source, somebody who advised people on using social media, for example, to attract investors and raise capital, it just didn't exist because the internet wasn't what it was. So it just goes, even my lifetime, and as you said, I'm nowhere near being 50. But it's interesting from even back when I was a teenager to now, how much the world has changed, what opportunities went away and what opportunities are readily available. And that's why I love the internet and I love the power of communicating online and how powerful and profound that can be and how that's constantly changing. But at the same time, it is people communicating and wanting to build relationships and it's based on the same behavioral and psychological principles that have applied for thousands of years if you really look at it.
It's interesting to me that you were only 13 years old and you had this concept that you were going to be a writer and or a businessman or both. That seems like a pretty precocious 13-year-old to come to that, to put those two, marry those two concepts together there. How did you do that? How did you come to that realization, that understanding at that age?
I've always liked writing. I was always good at writing. And I always knew that from an early age, that I wanted to make a lot of money. That was always, I don't know why I thought that, but I just knew I did, and I was certain that I would do it. That's where those two came together. I didn't know what a copywriter was back then, or what anything about online marketing, because online marketing existed, sort of didn't. So I can't really explain it that much further. It was just, I think we all have this layer of, let's call it authenticity or natural gifts, and we have different sweet spots, things that come more naturally and easily to us. And I just so happened to stumble upon what a few of those were at an early age. And I think, and this is actually something I picked up from someone else, and I'll give credit where credit is due. When I met I've been involved with personal development, personal growth for over a decade. And when I met her, my outlook was very much that personal development is about developing and growing and striving towards this thing. And her perspective, which I think is actually a much better and more practical perspective, was what if personal development is about cutting away the layers that don't serve us, the layers that aren't congruent with us. And what if we're perfect? The original is perfect because we're divine beings, and that it's all about cutting away the BS. And that is personal growth, addition by subtraction.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And as you were talking about, you weren't really sure how it came about, that you could put all those things together. It is oftentimes that children intuitively know a lot of things, but it is oftentimes trained out of them. And so I totally agree with you, and totally agree with the person you referenced there, that sometimes it is a subtraction. We have to take away things we've learned in order to really get back to the original copy of who we really were. But you've done it at a very young age, and were able to take that insight and to put it to use at a really young age. So how did that all come about?
Young is also subjective. When we say, so I went from my early teenage years to the world being what it was. And when I talk sometimes in webinars and things of that nature, and I share the story of being on social media since 8th grade and starting out on MySpace. So it's always been there. It hasn't been there in the way that it is now. And I was fortunate to experience this overlap of the internet, going from, by the time I was graduating high school, Facebook was already a thing. YouTube was a thing, very different than it was today, but you could go and you could watch stuff on YouTube, and that was a sort of newish kind of concept. So I think it's been a matter of, there's been a lot of discovery. And one of my things that I'm working on right now is taking it a level deeper, right? Because there is a level, and this is something, the time that we're having this conversation, that I'm still very much developing, that I think this is going to be the next big thing when it comes to marketing and lead generation in terms of attracting investors for projects, is understanding that we have this type of DNA. All of us have, I call it investor attraction DNA. It's based on our personality. It's based on what we're good at. It's based on our communication style, and it's based on our unique background. And I think what happens a lot of the times, and this applies directly to marketing, but also it applies to business directly too, that sometimes we should ourselves into doing certain things because there is a model for doing them, or because some guru said it works, or because someone is nagging us that we should do it. And sometimes it's a complete waste of time and resources, but we do it because we should. And it's completely impractical. And my perspective on that, and the more I've worked with people and the more I've understood the underlying behavior, is, imagine being able to understand what your unique investor attraction DNA is, and using that DNA, that combination of those things, as the framework, as the roadmap for how you generate leads, how you market yourself, and how you communicate. And it's a different way of looking at things. It's a way of looking at things that most people aren't even aware is possible, because they think that a one-size-fits-all approach, if it worked for one person, it'll work for them. Not necessarily, because it may not be aligned with them. And I think it's a fresh perspective. I think it's much, a real micro example is just with social media, right? Because someone goes into business or they get into real estate and they hear somewhere you should be on social media, and then they hear you should be posting 5 times a day. And that's just, it's not true. It's never been true. Some people shouldn't be posting at all. They're not content creators. Some people, the best thing is to share someone else's content once in a while. Some people can do all the marketing they need with one automated funnel. Some people need less automation. They're more talk on the phone kind of people. So it's funny because most people aren't quite aware that there's all these different tools available, all these tools in the toolkit, but you only need a few. If you have a few working really well and they're in alignment with, let's call it this DNA, then you're going to get tremendous results and save yourself a lot of frustration and a lot of headache too.
I couldn't agree with you more. Where did you come to all of these psychological and behavioral insights? It takes a lifetime for a lot of people to come to that. So where did you come to all that?
It's a combination of being in the trenches and seeing what people's sticking points are, seeing what my sticking points are, where I've made mistakes, where I've come up short. It's all being surrounded with good company. The person I mentioned, I happen to be dating. So when we met in her business, again, I'll give credit where credit is due, she's got an intuitive healing modality. And she's also happens to be a great marketer and business person, not in real estate, different type of arena. And it's been interesting because I have had certain perspectives and preconceived notions. And then I've observed and learned a lot of things that work for her that are very much aligned as well. That's been interesting, and it's been a perspective shift. But the other thing is just noticing the real life examples. I've been in a few different masterminds. I'm in a mastermind now, and there's people who I've known for a while, and I didn't really realize this until pretty recently, but most people year after year are doing the same thing. It's just very, I don't know why I found that so surprising, but now that I'm aware of it, I see it more readily. And even if it's just funny to see where people are stuck. And I think there can be a lot less stuckness, and the stuckness can be eliminated by looking at things with a certain perspective. So it's that level of awareness. And it's very contrarian, right? Because there's a lot of people out there who talk about a one-size-fits-all approach. And I think the real empowerment and the real possibility is in having the right framework, the right level of thinking, and then applying your DNA into the strategies and the tactics. That's where I think the best results really come in. Certainly something I'm constantly working on. And I think that's really where what we want to reap lies.
Makes a lot of sense. Just listening to you, it sounds like you just had a real smooth transition from adolescence to adulthood, and adulthood right on into business. I find that's oftentimes that's the frosting on the cake. And if we look below that, we find out that everybody has had some disappointments and setbacks and frustrations in life. Can you talk to us about one of your major disappointments and frustrations, and what did you learn from that, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, like you said, it is frosting on the cake. There's been a lot. There's been a lot of different things. One of those things, I'll give you a couple actually. I'll give you one that's a little further back, and then one that's a lot more recent. So one that's a little further back, right when I graduated college, and I went to school in rural Georgia. I grew up in Atlanta, but right after I graduated, what happened was I decided, and I made this decision a year before I graduated. So I decided I was going to go live in Las Vegas. My reasoning for living in Las Vegas was that I was at the time 21 years old, and I figured it would be a fun place to live, but it was also a very different place than where I had spent the bulk of my college years. Vegas. And I had never been there, so I wanted to live there. And so going out on a whim, some YouTube videos and some research, I graduated from school. And I remember I got my bachelor's in public relations. And I remember that last semester I graduated early, and there was this like pressure of, oh, you got to get a good job. You've got to put in a good resume. And I hated it. The idea irked me. And I said, no, I'm not doing that, because what most people were going to do was they were going to stay somewhere in Atlanta and go entry level and do all that BS. And I just zero interest in that. I was very clear on that. So what I did was I think 3 days after the graduation, this was December 2015, I got on a plane and I went to Vegas, not really knowing how I was going to support myself, not knowing where I was going to live. I had a friend there and I stayed at their place for the first 2-3 weeks, slept on an air mattress. It wasn't the most calculated move. It wasn't the best due diligence I've ever done, but it worked out. And it was mucky waters at first. It was very mucky and for the first time, I was in a survival mode kind of experience, because before that, I grew up at home and then I went off to college and that was that. But this was more like there was no, here's the straight line to follow. It was what you gonna do. So there definitely some different experiences in adversity there, but it was a big leap in terms of the world didn't end. It came out much better and with a different depth of experience. So there was that. And then the recent one, I was traveling with my girlfriend earlier this year. At the time we're having this conversation, it's 2020, and we were traveling for 5 weeks. We went away to New Zealand and Australia. And this was before the whole COVID situation happened. And I decided that I was going to do an event in Australia, in Melbourne, and that I was going to do it. And I had never been there, but I was going to fill a room. I was going to do a one-day event. And I used to do these things called Discovery Days. And the point of Discovery Day was to get people to attend the event who were business owners. It was more of a general event. And at the event to sell additional coaching and product. That was the business model. And I'd had some very lucrative opportunities doing that. So it was quite a grind, quite a hustle. It took a lot of resources to fill that room. But this was, I think it was February 10th. It was February something. And
the middle of summer, yeah.
What was that?
The middle of summer in Australia.
Yeah, exactly. Middle of summer, Melbourne. I'd had a lot of event stress. There was a lot of buildup. And I got to do the event and the room was full. That went well. A lot of people. And the event completely bombed in terms of sales. It was the worst selling event I have ever had. I don't think I actually lost money on that event, not to mention all the time, all the resources that were invested. And literally, I remember after, I was just physically drained. It just went, the energy of that room, it was something was way off. And it was definitely a setback in terms of revenue and cash flow at the time. But also what was great about it, what I didn't know at the time, was with the whole COVID thing would happen where live events were completely off the table. And it took me entirely online, which is so much easier, better. And there's a lot of perks to that as well. But that was really a bottom in terms of it's like running a marathon. And then you realize there's not a finish line. Then you never finish the marathon. And you never get whatever prize there is. So that was a very humbling experience. It was one of the biggest business setbacks I've ever had, but it turned out to be just, I think sometimes we evolve past something where sometimes something is no longer completely aligned with us. And it was that kind of experience that was one of the things that allowed me to realize that sooner rather than later, because there was I felt like I'd reached a cap into the potential of doing those types of events. I mean, it was, in the whole event, if I really look back at it, was a should. I'm traveling, I should do something, and I should do an event out there. So that was a recent setback that we can laugh about now, but at the time I was not a happy camper.
Yeah, I'm sure that was pretty devastating. So how did you deal with it at the time? How did you process that? How did you come back from it? Because devastating experiences like that, they're not only difficult at the time, but they can set us back. emotionally and psychologically. How did you deal with it?
It did. That evening, I went to bed early. I was just not feeling good, but the next day I realized we're still traveling and why not have some fun? So enjoyed the day out in Melbourne, and then we went to Sydney, and I had a little talk lined up in Sydney that was a 45-minute talk that wound up being more lucrative than the one-day events. And dealing with all those details, I just showed up and did my thing. But the big picture was the whole COVID situation hit, and there was about a 5 or 6 week stretch that just sucked. From getting back to the US, we were wanting to travel some more in the summer, to that sort of being off the table, to events now being off the table. But it led me back to sort of getting back to my roots of being an online marketer, because as great as events are, the name of the game is, for me anyway, is online. Now everything is online, virtual. I hardly leave the apartment here because everything is virtual, and I think it's more empowering. It's much less limiting. There was a transition in the business model and the way that I market. And one of the things I decided to do was I decided to work pretty much only with real estate entrepreneurs who on the attracting investors and raising capital side, because there are a lot of people who talk about LinkedIn lead gen in general, and I think that's great. It's a very different game of attracting investors and marketing that way. And not only has it been a unique challenge, but oftentimes the upside is much higher, because what happens is, let's say you use LinkedIn or social media, or you find a way to market and you attract one, we call them A-list investors. That investor, they're writing you a check for however much. And if they're getting a good return, they're going to be your best advocate. They're going to be your best referral source. So I think I'm still scratching the potential on the market and the possibilities. And it's an arena where there's a lot of people right now who are real estate entrepreneurs who are sort of just waking up to the idea where, oh no, you can't really go to in-person networking events anymore for meeting investors. Not that strategy was the best one to begin with, but now they need to be online too. And there's a whole range of skills and tools available, and there's a massive opportunity available as well.
Interesting times. Yakov, I know our enlightened investors would love to get in touch, so please tell us how we can connect with you.
I'm on LinkedIn, as people might imagine, Yakov Smart. They can also go to linkedleads.us, not LinkedIn Leads, linkedleads.us. And there, if you go to linkleads.us/raising capital webinar, there's an online training. We usually have one once a week where you can attend and find out if you're looking for more of the strategies and tactics for attracting investors on LinkedIn and raising more capital. It's a good way to get started in that training as well.
Thank you for joining us on Creekside Chats with Successful Real Estate Investors, brought to you by Steed Talker Capital. For more information, as well as access to our free ebook on enhancing your well-being through real estate investing, be sure to connect with us at steedtalker.com. As part of our efforts to make the world a better place, Steed Talker Capital contributes to activities and organizations committed to better understand the equine and enhance the humane treatment of horses worldwide. Steed Talker Capital, working for a world where all creatures, great and small, flourish abundantly. Connect with us at steedtalker.com. Thank you for joining us on Creekside Chats with Successful Real Estate Investors, brought to you by Steed Talker Capital. For more information, as well as access to our free ebook on enhancing your well-being through real estate investing, be sure to connect with us at steedtalker.com. As part of our efforts to make the world a better place, Steed Talker Capital contributes to activities and organizations committed to better understand the equine and enhance the humane treatment of horses worldwide. Steed Talker Capital, working for a world where all creatures, great and small, flourish abundantly. Connect with us at steedtalker.com.